Well, years before the ARPANET began in my lab in 1969, as an MIT graduate student between 1960 and 1962, for my PhD dissertation, I had developed the underlying mathematical theory of data networks. And because I had established the theory and shown that it would work, they brought me in to be the first node of the ARPANET, since I had the basic understanding of what the technology could and should do. As the first node on the ARPANET in September 1969, we had no one else to talk to. But by October '69, the next month, a second node was established up at Stanford Research Institute, 400 miles to the north of UCLA. And when they connected their computer to the network, we now had two computers on this fledgling internet. And so my students and I decided to communicate between the first two nodes. And essentially what we did was to establish a way in which we could log in from our computer at UCLA to the machine up north at SRI. And all we wanted to do was to log in. Now, in order to log in, all you have to do is type LOG. And the remote machine is smart enough to know what you're trying to do. It will type the IN for you to form the word login. So what we did, my student and I at UCLA began to talk to one of the programmers up at SRI. And in order to be sure we had a good connection, we put a telephone connection between us on this data connection. And so we had my programmer student, Charlie Klein. He typed the L, and we asked, "Do you get the L?" And Bill Duval up at SRI said, "Yep, got the L." And we typed the O. "You get the O?" "Yep, got the O." Then we typed the G. "You get the G?" Crash. The SRI computer crashed. So all we did in our first day was October 29th, 1969, in the evening, was to type LO. So the first message ever on the internet was lo, as in lo and behold. Now, we didn't plan to make a very clever message. We weren't as smart Alexander Graham Bell, who's basically said, "Come here, Watson, I want to speak to you," on the first telephone message. Or "What hath God wrought?" Samuel Morse for the first telegraph message. Or "A giant leap for mankind," Neil Armstrong on the moon. Those guys were smart. They understood public relations and media. All we wanted to do was log in, but we came up with lo, which is perhaps the most succinct, most prophetic, most dynamic message you can imagine for the first message ever on the internet. Well, as I described the first moment, it was a simple message we were trying to send. But you have to understand this was not prepared. There was no one else in the room. There was no camera, no sound recording, just a simple entry in a log tracking the fact that we connected to SRI. It was not a great amount of publicity. And we didn't think of this as an eventful moment. It was important, obviously, but it was a simple, quiet time with nobody around, nobody recognizing what was going on. But we felt great that we could make that connection. Well, the work that I had done in the 1960 to 1962 period was done at MIT long before anyone considered building such a network. This was an exercise in trying to develop a mathematical theory of data networks, and then to prove that the theory was correct, that would then lead to design considerations, and to trying to extract the principles of how a data network would perform. Now, the packet switching idea came about long before the idea of building a network. It was only in the mid-1960s, when ARPA decided they wanted a network, that the idea of implementing one came along. In those early days, the telephone system, AT&T, when we told them about these packet networks, these data networks, they said it wouldn't work. And they said, even if it does work, we want nothing to do with it. And the reason was everything was voice communications in those days. And all their revenue, all their money was being made on voice communications. There was no data to send. So they figured this was not an interesting idea. How wrong they were. So there are two issues, circuit switching versus packet switching, and what packet switching and the internet has created. As regarding circuit switching, it was clear to me as a student that the circuit switching technology of the telephone network would be woefully inadequate for data communications. And the reason is that in a voice communications, a dedicated sequence of communication links is put together for a conversation between myself and a second party. And that set of links is dedicated for the entire conversation. If we pause for a moment to have a cup of coffee, the links are idle and they're being wasted during our conversation. That's the circuit switching network. But in voice communications over the circuit switching network, you're silent about 1/3 of the time, and that's perfectly okay. Economically, that's acceptable. But when two computers talk to each other, or when you sit down at a keyboard and key in a message, almost all of the time you're sending nothing. These lines are lying idle, waiting for you to send a few bits over 1 billion bit per second line. So the inefficiency of data communications on a dedicated path is horrendous. So circuit switching would not work, where circuit switching says, we're going to dedicate the communication as long as you are connected. Can't do that, because most of the time when I'm connected, I'm sending nothing in a data communication system. So the idea of dynamically assigning the communications capacity was the key idea, this idea of sharing that communications resource sharing, was critical to the development of data networks. And one manifestation of this resource sharing is packet switching, whereby you only get to use the communications medium when you have something to send. And when you finish sending, you let go, and other people can use the same communications medium. Now, in terms of what packet switching means, it's a technology which allows data systems to communicate. But the implications of what happened from that packet switching network, the growth of what we now call the internet, the idea that people can talk over a Skype connection, or they can send photographs, or have a Facebook, or have a YouTube system, or have Instagram, all the social networks that have derived out of this internet have had an enormous effect, and something which we never anticipated would occur in those early days of data networks. So the applications and the way humanity has come to use the internet is the really interesting and important impact of these networks that have now been provided and created. So 2 months before the first switch appeared here at UCLA, the beginnings of the internet, a press release was put out at UCLA in which I'm quoted. And in that quote, what I predicted was that this growing network would be one which was always available, always on, could be accessed at any time by anybody with any device from any location, and it would be as easy to use as an electric or telephone utility. Namely, it would be invisible. When you use electricity now, you plug into the wall and you expect electricity. You don't care how it's made, you don't even know how it's made. It's invisible to you, it's disappeared into the infrastructure. I had hoped that the internet would also become highly valuable, highly functional, and disappear into the infrastructure. Well, in terms of my predictions, yes, it's always on. It's always available. Anybody with any device can get on from any location, but the internet is certainly not invisible at this point. It's far too complex and complicated to use. The human-computer interface is really pretty bad. You have to learn to type. You have to learn to configure your devices. You have to make sure that they're connected the right way. You have to look around for a Wi-Fi connection or for a high-speed Ethernet connection. It's far too complicated. My hope is still that the internet technology will disappear into the infrastructure. It'll be present everywhere around us. This Internet of Things whereby we take cyberspace and pull it out from behind the screen of your computer in which it's trapped right now and bring it out into our physical world. It'll be embedded in our walls, in our tables, in our fingernails, in our bodies, in our cars. And the internet will be present everywhere, and we'll be able to communicate with it in a natural way. We'll be able to talk to our room. The room will know it's us. We can ask questions. We'll get answers by voice or holograms or displays in a very natural, easy human to internet interface. That has yet to happen, and I'm looking forward to that occurring. Well, as I said, one of the challenges is to make the internet invisible, to disappear into the infrastructure surrounding us. And to do that, what's happening now and will happen in the future is the deployment of embedded devices, small devices, actuators, sensors, logic, memory, displays, cameras, microphones, in our environment, as I say, in our bodies, in our fingernails, in our walls, in our tables, etc. So the idea of physical devices embedded in our physical infrastructure communicating with us. At the same time, we'll have intelligent software agents out in cyberspace doing the things we ask them to, providing us information, mining data, alerting us, reminding us, etc. And you know, right now, those intelligent software agents and those embedded devices in our physical infrastructure are generating more traffic on the internet than are humans. That's already an indication that where we're heading for is what I like to refer to as a global nervous system, a global internet nervous system for the entire planet. And that's where we're heading. It'll be invisible, it'll be everywhere, it'll be omnipresent, it'll be easy to use, and it'll be cooperative and functional.